Diamond Crystal Kosher salt recently doubled in price. American recipe developers, including me, have been evangelizing the use of DCK for the last 20 to 30 years. And it looks like our dreams have finally come true. More home cooks are using it, and we all know what happens when the demand goes up. The price goes up as well. Normally, it's a gradual process, but with the DCK, it wasn't gradual at all. They redesigned the box to make it white. I guess they were going for that clean apple look, and doubled the price. Just like that. A 3-pound box at my affordable store used to cost about $3.50. Now the same store sells it for $7. Whole Foods sells it for $10. Amazon sells it for $14. Suddenly, I felt uneasy salting my pasta water with DCK. So I did the unthinkable. I tried using table salt in my water, and you know what? Nothing terrible happened. This gave me an idea to set up a series of experiments to test 4 different salt types: Diamond Crystal Kosher, Morton's Kosher, Alessi fine-grained sea salt, and generic brand table salt. All these prices are from Market Basket. It's a very affordable supermarket. Of course, your prices might be totally different, but it gives you an idea of how these salts compare to each other. My criteria for choosing salts for this test was the price and availability in the US. I was looking for salts that are cheaper and more widely available than DCK, so no fleur de sel or Moldens in this test. The difference between salts is in the crystal structure. Say you got a foot of snow on your driveway. How much your back is going to hurt from shoveling that snow depends on what kind of snow it was. Was it light and fluffy, or was it wet and heavy? Even though all snow is just water, how much water is contained in a given volume will vary greatly. The same is true for salts. That's why a teaspoon of salt is a meaningless measurement unless you specify the exact brand and type of salt. The most common problem people in the US experience with salt when following a recipe is this. People like me who develop recipes for a living use Diamond Crystal Kosher salt. Most home cooks in the US have a much easier time finding Morton's Kosher salt than Diamond Crystal Kosher. For years, I've used the conversion that Cooks Illustrated gave for these 2 salts, but it turned out to be slightly inaccurate. If 1 teaspoon of DCK weighs 2.8 grams, based on the box and my scale, that is correct, 1 teaspoon of Morton's should weigh 3.7, according to Cooks Illustrated. But it definitely weighs more. If we consult the side of the box, 1 teaspoon of Morton's should weigh 4.8 grams. The exact numbers will vary with the teaspoon shape and humidity conditions, but my high precision scale gave me 4.9 grams. Based on this data, a safer conversion is 2 teaspoons of DCK equal barely over 1 teaspoon of Morton's Kosher. Here is the weights for 1 teaspoon of each salt I'm using in this test. I made a 1% salt water solution using all 4 salts. In other words, 100 grams of warm water and 1 gram of salt. I stirred each jar to dissolve the salt. Here's how long it took. Then I tasted all the samples. This wasn't a blind taste test, but for the life of me, I couldn't tell the difference between the samples. I was always told that the presence of iodine in table salt would make it taste metallic, but I couldn't detect it. The only difference that I've observed between these samples is that Diamond Crystal dissolved much faster than the others. So if you're using a different salt in a wet application, it's important to give it sufficient time to dissolve before tasting. Otherwise, you're risking adding more salt prematurely. Unfortunately, this was the only test where I could ensure that the amount of salt I was using was exactly the same between samples. Even if I weighed the salt and my ingredients for my chicken, vegetables, and egg experiments, there was still a problem of distributing the salt evenly. So I decided to use my intuition. I mean, that's how I would do it in real life anyway. I don't weigh my salt when making a salad. The water test showed me that there wasn't any detectable flavor difference. The differences I was looking for in my other experiments were in texture and ease of use. I dried and salted 4 skinless boneless chicken thigh pieces. Then I seared them in the skillet and tasted them. Here I've noticed significant differences. Morton's Kosher barely dissolved. It's easier to see it in the skillet than on the chicken. Here it is, stuck to the pan. It tasted like crunchy chunks of salt attached to the bland chicken. If you like what Adam Ragusa calls heterogeneous seasoning, you might think it's a feature. I thought it was a bug. Both the table salt and fine-grained sea salt samples were slightly uneven with a hint of salty crunch on the outside. The Diamond Crystal Kosher sample was the only one evenly seasoned. Some of it is due to the fact that I am used to it. The problem with fine-grained salts was that it was hard to see them once they landed on the chicken, making it hard to judge how much to use. It was also hard to sprinkle them evenly using my fingers. I have more to say about that later when I address the question of salt shakers. I repeated this experiment with an overnight rest after salting. I salted the chicken, wrapped up each piece, and refrigerated overnight. Then I dried and seared it. This gave the salts a chance to thoroughly dissolve and absorb. In this case, there was absolutely no difference between samples. They were all seasoned evenly. The table salt sample was just barely undersalted. That's just my mistake. But using a salt that helps me reduce user error is important to me. So for seasoning proteins, I am sticking with DCK. I sliced and salted some cucumbers to test a juicy vegetable application. I rubbed the slices together briefly and tasted them. Diamond Crystal Kosher, table, and fine-grained sea salt dissolved quickly. Morton's Kosher didn't, and I found it unpleasant. For this test, I didn't salt my vinaigrette to evaluate the texture of salt. Diamond Crystal Kosher dissolved completely and gave me a delightful salad. Table and fine-grained sea salts were a bit sandy. I can see how this salty sandiness can be described as metallic. I found the salads slightly unpleasant. Morton's Kosher sample tasted like bland lettuce with an occasional rock of salt. To my taste, it was terrible. You could, of course, make an argument that I could have dissolved the salt in the acidic component of the salad dressing, like lemon juice or vinegar, before adding the oil. Keep in mind that salt dissolves in water, but not in oil. That would definitely help. But it doesn't solve the problem completely. It's hard to know upfront how much dressing you'll need. That's why I like to control my acidity and my salt separately. I salt my dressing to give my salad a head start, and then I add more salt to taste while tossing the salad. In this application, Diamond Crystal Kosher is worth its price in gold. A hard-boiled egg doesn't give the salt any liquid to dissolve in, so you really get to see its texture. Diamond Crystal Kosher was the most pleasant. It had a very mild crunch without tasting gritty. Fine-grained sea salt and table salt had slightly more grittiness, and Morton's Kosher tasted like rocks. I haven't used a salt shaker for more than 20 years, but I'm starting to rethink this for fine-grained salts. The back of my cast iron skillet makes it very easy to see. Here is fine-grained sea salt sprinkled with a shaker. This seems to give me a relatively even layer. And here it is sprinkled with fingers. This comes out rather clumpy. Maybe that's due to New England humidity. For DCK and Morton's Kosher, fingers work really well. Being able to pinch the salt gives me an intuitive measure for how much I'm using. But for fine-grained salts, salt shakers might not be such a bad idea. So, what have we learned today? If you're a fan of DCK and find its new price upsetting, there is no harm in switching to table salt for cooking pasta, rice, potatoes, and other things that you boil in water. If money is tight, that applies to soups as well. For all other applications, Diamond Crystal Kosher is still my salt of choice, and quite frankly, it is not that expensive. Even if you pay $14 for it on Amazon, a 3-pound box will last a while. Here are more thought-provoking culinary videos for you to check out, and if you are ever in the Boston area, maybe I'll see you in one of my classes.